So good evening, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning if you're joining from other parts of the world. I'm Preeti Daruka. I'm one of the founders and global coordinator for BRICS Feminist Watch. This online seminar, Powering Justice, Feminist Reflections on BIMSTEC, Climate Change and Energy, is hosted by BRICS Feminist Watch in partnership with PWESCR and financial support from Heinrich Stiftung India office. And welcome. I, along with my dear friend Shubha Chako, will be the moderators today. And before I hand it over to Shubha to hold the space for us, I wanted to just go over some ground rules. We are video recording the seminar. In case if you have you don't want your part of it recorded, just let us know and we will respect that. We are going to use the video recording for social media posting and for wider audience distribution. The structure of the webinar will be split into two sections. In the first phase, we'll have three presenters, and then we will break for discussion Q&A session in the middle. Then we'll have a phase two where we'll have two additional experts presenting. And then towards the end also, we'll have enough time to have a discussion and take on some questions from the audience. So I will definitely encourage you, use the chat. And I recognize that there is a lot of expertise in the audience. Please share your comments, questions in the chat, and we will be very happy to take them on and present it before the speakers to respond to it. Each presenter will have 8 minutes for their initial intervention. Unfortunately, the webinar is only in English, and apologies for no translation. This is just because of lack of resources. We recognize the limitation this poses. I would request everyone to keep your mics muted if you're not speaking so that there's no background disturbance. As we introduce the presenters, we will just give a brief introduction. A detailed bio of each presenter would be shared in the chat so that you can look at that. This will help us save a little bit of time. So without any much delay, let me introduce my dear friend Shubha Chako. Shubha is a member of BRICS Feminist Watch and was also the executive director of Solidarity Foundation, an NGO that supports grassroots level organizations of gender and sexual minority and sex workers. Shubha has worked extensively in the area of gender and development. Shubha, I'm going to hand over the proceedings to you. It's all yours.
Thank you, everyone. Excited and delighted to be here. Thank you for coming from whichever part of the world you are at. So we are talking today, about at a time when COP30 is just going to happen. So it's a very opportune moment for us to have this discussion. And we're focusing on the Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sector technical and economic cooperation, BIMSTEC. Now, over the world, as we speak, there's been a gradual shift in the global order, with the global south actually playing a more critical role, as you can see in whether it's BRICS or Quad, or whether it is the expanded G20. So it's within this landscape that we're looking at BIMSTEC and what it can bring together, because it brings together an interesting set of countries: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. And while it was established at the time when actually the financial crisis in Asia happened, 1997, progress has been rather sluggish for many years. It was quiet, and nothing much happened for very many reasons. In 2014, it got a fresh lease of life with the establishment of a permanent secretariat at Dhaka. This was followed by a very important milestone, being the 2022 Colombo summit, where actually the charter got written. And that then gives you the framework within which BIMSTEC will be operating. The geographical span is also interesting, because you have, from the hills and up to the sea. So it's quite a range. And, from the mountains to the sea. So, and it is one of the most climate vulnerable areas. So, facing issues like rising sea levels, cyclones, floods, droughts, etc. The challenge has been for BIMSTEC is to align its economic cooperation agenda with the realities of ecological breakdowns and climate injustice. Now, if you I want to if you just focus for a minute on the climate and energy nexus, energy has been a very core part of its mandate, but as an engine of growth, but it's also been a site of contestation. The region's energy demands is rising very rapidly because of population growth, industrialization, urbanization. And now BIMSTEC has taken this very seriously, and there's an energy center that's been set up in Bangalore and a center for weather and climate in Noida, which is aiming to foster collaboration and climate connectivity. But progress has been rather slow in this, and primarily it has been looked at either an economic or infrastructural challenge rather than a justice issue. And this is where, you know, when even in discourses around energy transition, the discourse seems to still mirror that of the north, and it's not even renewable energy projects such as the hydropower corridors in India or Bhutan or the solar initiatives in Bangladesh. They're celebrated as green success stories, but they've often displaced indigenous people, they've disrupted local ecosystems. So we are looking for a feminist analysis which foregrounds that energy transition, not just as technological shifts, but social processes that reshape labor, land, and care economies. Feminist scholars and movements in South Asia have long pointed out that this extractive approach to development, where, whether it is through coal or hydropower, it actually reinforces patriarchal and class hierarchies, often excluding women and marginalized groups from decision making, playing a role in shaping the agenda, and seeing them as contributors. From a global south perspective, BIMSTEC does offer us a chance to challenge the North's thinking about, climate change, the mainstream ideas that there are, because even now the North tends to dictate terms and create the framework. So a re-energized BIMSTEC can serve as a platform for Southern solidarity. And that's why we feel that we as feminists should engage with regional bodies like this, uh, because we need to move away from just this idea of green growth to actually forge alternatives grounded in ecological justice and collective responsibility. I will end with this and I will call upon the first speaker. What we will be doing is just introducing the speaker in a line or so, and then the more detailed bio will be in the chat. So really happy to start with Aditi Kapoor, who is a social scientist and has been the co-founder and trustee of Alternative Futures and is also a gender consultant with the Asian Development Bank. Aditi will give us an overview of the issue and set the context for us. Over to you, Aditi. You have about 6 to 8 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shubha and Preeti, the organizers. I think it's extremely important to really talk about the changing the narrative from a feminist perspective, because there's a lot written and a lot said about how climate change impacts women, and a lot of the countries are also coming up with policies, but I think changing the narrative is something that is really really a bigger challenge. Since I'm the first speaker, let me just say things that all of you might probably know, to say that the BIMSTEC countries actually have to safeguard 22% of the world's population on 3% of geographical land. And also the fact that, considering that this particular area is called a world hazard belt, with all the various disasters worsened by climate change, visiting it, especially, the looking at cyclones and tsunamis, floods, landslides, cloud bursts, droughts, so very different kinds, combinations, GLOF, which is the glacial lake outburst, heat, stress, sea ingress, and also the fact that a lot of the traditionally known disasters in areas are now giving way to new disasters. So flood-prone areas are, facing droughts, which are called meteorological droughts, basically where the rains are not coming on time, and so um, there's a bigger water crisis for food production, and also for drinking water and etc. So this particular area is really, really dynamic as far as climate impact is concerned. And the area is very highly vulnerable, is also seen by the fact that countries like Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal really rank high on their on the national vulnerability index, if you look at it. And vulnerability index is a combination of the exposure that people have to different hazards, and also the capacity to deal with it. So that's what, combination of it really gives you the vulnerability index. Must say that BIMSTEC has realized very late in life, in 2022, to actually have a plan of action on environment and climate change. As Shubha rightly said, there's a Center for Weather and Climate in Noida, and Govindji will speak about the Energy Center in Bangalore. And the main focus of this particular plan is supposed to be biodiversity, waste management, and climate change, including disaster management. As far as I've been able to understand, there is no feminist perspective, there is no gender, there are no women. It's something that's left to national priorities, whatever the countries themselves would like to do. And so, it's extremely important to understand that if climate action, the narrative has to be feminist for climate action and climate policy, then what is it that the countries are doing? Because together, then they can actually learn from each other and build on each other. If you look at the countries, Nepal is very progressive as far as political participation of women, at least on paper, is there. At least they have 33% reservation in parliament. And I think 50% of the candidates need to be women, because even at the grassroots level, they have self-governance, which is where they have women representatives. India is, of course, now most of the states have 50% reservation for women in local self-governance bodies, in villages as well as in cities. And hopefully the bill on 33% of reservation in parliament will see the light of the day at some point in time, and overcome some of the obstacles to at least have more women in parliament. I think also the fact that Bangladesh has, I think, 50 seats reserved out of 300 in parliament for women. But Bhutan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand really have no such reservations. Now, why am I talking about this? Because to change the narrative, you need to change the narrative in the policies and at the political level, as well as have the wherewithal to change it at the local level. So I think that's something that's extremely important. So, for instance, if you look at if you look at the narrative, how is it different from the North? So why is it important that we need to have more women in these positions? Most of the BIMSTEC countries, all of the BIMSTEC countries are basically agricultural societies. There is feminization of agriculture also in northern countries, but to a far lesser extent. I think women are in the front line when you're looking at the BIMSTEC countries far more than in the northern countries. And so they are the ones who really need to change the narrative. And they will be able to do so if they are in political positions at, on all the various tiers of governance. That is when they will be able to do it. So it's extremely important to have them there. And I think this is where if governments in BIMSTEC can actually highlight, and this is data that countries are already collecting. At least I know that Nepal has some collection of that. EC mode, for instance, when it participates, it gives examples from Nepal. India has examples that they've even got an award system where women are doing great things on environment and climate change. So at BIMSTEC level, if they start sharing this, then this is something that other countries will pick up. So I think that wherewithal, that positions of power is something that's extremely important. And countries which have it can then start actually helping other countries to build. And that is the only way the narrative will really change. Why I'm also saying it is, the next point that I really wanted to make out is that the narrative for the climate change, the policies, the Paris Agreement, it's all set on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change doesn't do research on climate. It only pulls together what is already there in written form. Now, that's again where southern countries and BIMSTEC countries actually, are not represented. Because if you look at the assessment report 6, and now the assessment report 7 will be out, I think, in 2028. They've just, selected all the authors and the reviewers to review all the all the scientific literature which is out. There are several barriers. For AR6, the assessment report 6 that was out, about a third of the authors were women. Now it's apparently 43%. But countries in BIMSTEC are not represented. Southern countries are not represented. SIDS are also not represented. They're not part of BIMSTEC. But just to say that, so you have, say, about 24 people from India. Being a large country, you have about 24 people from India. Some of them are women. You have maybe 2 or 3 from Bangladesh, from Nepal, Bhutan. I don't think there's any authors, no authors, and neither from some of the other BIMSTEC countries. So if you have nobody changing the narrative of the driving force for climate policy for the world, then it's really a very serious matter. The other thing is that the women who are there, to say, well, okay, some BIMSTEC countries, women are there, and so they should be able to, kind of change the narrative. There are again several barriers. Some of these women, and this is not a discrimination, a kind of, it's a bias which is felt by authors, and there are several studies on this. English. So if English is not, you're not good in English, then you're going to have a problem actually writing. And at the end of the day, some northern white man or a western white man is going to take up actual writing. So there are studies, scholarly studies, which are there on this. The second thing is just publications. We're in BIMSTEC also, a lot of our countries are oral tradition countries. We don't have things written. What is there is gray literature. So some of us have in the past fought to say that IPCC should also consider what is called gray literature. Gray literature is essentially reports, etc. But traditionally you only consider peer-reviewed literature, which is essentially in English. So you will not find it in Bangla or Hindi or any of Nepali or any of the other languages. That's a huge discrimination. So what knowledge are you really sharing with the world to form climate policies? So I think that's extremely important. And that brings me to my next point, is this whole thing about, the knowledge that people have. So women, like I said, are in the front lines. And what are the main sectors that are being really affected by climate change? So, it's agriculture, water, health. Those are kind of the main sectors. Agriculture, when I say agriculture, it's allied activities, and water and health. Those are kind of the main things. How much literature are we generating? Yeah, how many even gray literature are we really generating? There are policies that are there in some of the BIMSTEC countries like Sri Lanka and India, which are now trying to document some of the traditional knowledge, which women, which is really very rich among women, whether it's to do with agriculture, whether it's to do with health. We all listen. I mean, we've grown up. Many of us have grown up with cool drinks, which will keep the heat out when we go out during the peak summer days, right? Now, that's things that have been passed down from our grandmothers. Then also the fact that I went for a holiday to the mountains, and I was talking to this girl who works in the hotel, and the kind of things she told me about, little things about the herbs and spices that they use, and the way they cook things and the way they preserve things. So the idea is that that is the only thing that's going to help people adapt. How do we tap that knowledge? Does so even the countries like Sri Lanka and India, which are now looking at traditional knowledge, it's still a challenge. So
Sorry, Aditi. Yeah, thank
let me just end by saying that I think what is really, really kind of, needed is that this knowledge needs to be documented, and B, some of these actions, because a lot of the women are doing what is called organic agriculture, eco-friendly agriculture. They are the ones who have the knowledge. They are the ones who are doing much more work, etc. That actions need to be codified, and the kind of sustainable development goals, achievements on health, etc., which the women have, that needs to be also codified. They need to inform the local adaptation plans that the countries are making. And so the only way to change the narrative is to have more women in political positions, to showcase what they have, to focus on some of the traditional knowledge that's there, and then to also try and change the narrative at the top by making sure that a lot of this can be written, recorded, podcast, whatever, and pursue the IPCC to also look at these things. It's not yet looking at podcasts, etc., reels. Whereas I think that's the easiest way, for BIMSTEC country women to actually record what they want to record, right? It's very friendly to oral tradition. So I think those are areas that we as women should really emphasize to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aditi. That really set the context in a very broad way and also zoned in on some very interesting ideas around knowledge. Melani Gunathilaka to speak with us. And Melani, of course, a climate activist, and she's focused specifically on climate justice and death, issues around death. So, Melani, over to you.
Shubha, her name is Melani.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I got it
I'm
as
just,
Malini.
I
Sorry.
know, Melanie.
Thank you.
Okay,
It's
sorry.
a mistake that happens quite often. Thank you so much for having me today. And I'll get into it without delaying time too much. So basically, I think Sri Lanka is in a quite unique position given the economic and the debt crisis that we have been experiencing, and the so-called economic recovery that is just focused on fiscal targets. So I'd like to just add a little bit onto what Farida said about the carbon emissions and these net zero targets as well, because we've been focused, or we've been framing the issue of climate just around carbon emissions. But now we also hear talks about triple planetary crisis, right? Because this is not only an issue about carbon, but this is also an issue about biodiversity loss. And on the other hand, we see pollution, plastic pollution linked to fossil fuels and the other types of emissions as well. So I think, and also the forever chemicals that is in our food, our air, our blood, everywhere, right? So this existing framing and the solutions that it has been bringing, and I think Sri Lanka is put in quite a position where we are unable to negotiate in terms of what really works for us, but we have to just take what is given to us because we're in a debt crisis, we're in an economic crisis, and we're going through this IMF conditions, which has imposed austerity on us. And so this shows quite a stark reality on what is shown on policy in terms of macroeconomics or national level targets on all the policy decisions and the lived realities of the people on the ground. And Sri Lanka recently published the National Climate Finance Strategy, the roadmap from 2025 to 2030. So this speaks a lot about private financing and private-public partnership, and it speaks about valuations of ecosystem services. So basically, commodification of nature and putting a value on natural environment and the biodiversity as well. So Sri Lanka, as a member of BIMSTEC, and as we adopted the charter in 2022, I believe we do have an opportunity to present what works for us, because I believe it, just like, we think that we do not have any bargaining power because we are in a crisis. I believe it actually gives us a bargaining power, because we can show that everything else that, that tried to work didn't work. So what could work? And so with the economic crisis, we are being told that Sri Lanka is on the path to recovery and our macroeconomic is doing better. But at the same time, we have a quarter of the population in below poverty lines, and the poverty is increasing, and over 1 million families had to disconnect electricity because IMF imposed, IMF is pushing for, there's a push for privatization of electricity, and also IMF conditions suggested that we had to increase our electricity rates as well. So this means people are unable to access basic needs as days go by. And the other issue is that we've been continuing to prioritize export-led agriculture as opposed to people's needs. So this is not new, and I think this is also not new to a lot of other countries in the region and the other BIMSTEC countries as well. Basically, our economic policy is still structured exactly as when we were under the British colonial rule. It's using our natural resources and our labor to serve the global market, to serve people elsewhere, to serve countries elsewhere, while our people, our laborers are getting paid minimum wage, and while our natural resources are being exploited. And I think when we talk about how we can bring in feminist values into BIMSTEC agreements, and how we can actually strengthen feminist values within that, it's also important to understand some of the major setbacks in the neoliberal economics, which is completely ignoring the environmental costs or putting the brunt of the environmental harm on the societies or on the people. And while we are receiving all of this climate financing, through the private sector, this ignores the previous harm that is being done. So now we are getting money to restore our environments that has been previously damaged, but nobody paid for the damages that was caused. The people paid. People paid with their health, their lives, and the environment paid as well. So I think in terms of finances, we need to really understand, we need to really not take everything that is given to us, but also critically analyze that. And I don't see this happening within the Sri Lankan government right now, though we have a more progressive government, at least on paper, but they are unfortunately going down the same road that was laid by the previous regimes and by the IMF.
Can you start to close your arguments? Can you start to?
Sorry.
Hello. Can you start to conclude? Can you start?
Yes. Yes. Sure. And I think what I would like to share is how we can change, what BIMSTEC could actually become if it is rooted in feminist principles. So instead of GDP growth, if we can collectively look at how we can support each other, and if we can measure our success through the well-being of the people. And like we were speaking earlier, there are renewable projects even in Sri Lanka that are harming ecosystems, that are harming people's lives. So this is not the way to go, and this is not supporting the countries, and this is not supporting climate adaptations of the country as well. So, and to specifically what we can do is looking at how we can reduce carbon emissions through the trades. So rather than spending on longer and carbon extensive trade, we should be looking at empowering local communities and and improving more collaboration over competition among the groups. And if we can, and also tax carbon intensive productions and distribution, and reward near sourcing circular reuse. And also encouraging women's agroecological networks that link to local producers directly with the consumers. And democratize financing and trade governance through replacing the elite export credit systems and supporting community trade funds, which are managed by the local communities and women's groups. And if we can push for gender balanced trade negotiations, and if we can make sure that women are at the center of energy decision making, especially because these are areas that are highly dominated by men, and redirect climate finances towards grassroots cooperatives, especially women's cooperatives and community groups. And also I think it's important to understand both the environmental damage and also the discrimination for women happens through the very same system, very through patriarchal and neoliberal systems. So providing solutions, and also I believe we actually have two fights. One is fighting the old system, and the second one is building the new. But unfortunately, we are at a place where we'll have to do both at the same time. So I think BIMSTEC actually could provide a great platform to do this if we pull our energies together, and if we can really push our governments to come into regional agreements and dialogues that puts women, feminist values at core. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melanie, and apologies once again about your name. So sorry about it. So Preeti, I'll hand it over to you. If there are questions that people want to ask, we can pick them up now. Farida, I think, is not there, but before we go to that, can I request all of you to put on your videos, and Vishnu, maybe we can do a photograph at this point, because unfortunately we can't all stand together for a group photo. So
yes, sure.
Thanks so much, Shubha. As photos are being taken, I again want to invite all of you. Please do share your thoughts and all. And I think one thing Sankalpa shared, which is International Fisherwoman Day on 5th November. I think there was a statement issued in that, or a press statement. I'll try to find it and I'll post it in the chat. Since it was mentioned by Farida, it might be worth looking at. So some of the interesting things people have shared in the first session, which was very interesting from the point of view of overall, framing and context, as well as looking at our region to country specific. I think our challenge is how we can engage and influence BIMSTEC. Like, even if we look at, what is the growing narrative in this whole context of whether, the speakers talked about net zero as opposed to carbon reduction. But people centric is something which is always left out. And that's where, how do we engage or bring in that perspective, even in the region, which is really annoying, frustrating, that our countries at one level can be very critical in terms of talking about, Western approach and how they are different. But when they are in these kind of groupings, or even at national level, they have not done much, is what we heard from our presenters. So, whether it is how do we change the narrative, or how do we, engage and put gender at the center of this. I would just pose that as a point to think about if speakers want to take on. There is something which someone has shared. Let me go through it while, if Aditi, if you want to respond, and then Melani can give us few more thoughts on how do we engage with this platform in bringing gender on board.
So I think
yeah, and Shalini's also placed an important question. So after Aditi, we can
Right.
go to.
And so Aditi, if you want me to just read out what Shalini has shared also,
okay.
and you can combine both Melanie and Aditi in your response. So Shalini says the panel is well outlined, a triple injustice. Aditi showed how our knowledge systems are exclusionary. Farida showed how economic policies are patriarchal and render women's work invisible. Melanie showed how the global financial architecture of debt and austerity is neocolonial and exploitative. It seems the real crisis isn't climate change here, but the oppressive system managing. Should a feminist BIMSTEC agenda therefore prioritize debt justice, land rights over simply promoting green energy? Darshini, I'll take hers also, Aditi. This has been really insightful. I sadly have to drop out. Okay. She's just messaging us. So, Aditi, I partly agree with Shalini. I don't think it's either or, but Aditi, I'll leave it to you and Melanie to respond to that.
Sorry, what did you say you don't agree with?
Well, Shalini is saying that whether we should just focus on prioritizing debt justice and land rights over green energy. Like green energy itself is, of course, from a South perspective, is very problematic. What that means. In BRICS Feminist Watch, we had an engaged discussion on green economy or blue economy and how gendered it is and what that really translates to. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not either or. We do have to look at climate injustice, at the same time look at some of these oppressive systems where women are located and which continue to produce systems of oppression or discrimination, injustice.
Preeti, when you asked me to speak here, I know I'm like starting from here, but, I just want to say that when you asked me to speak here, I said yes, but really, I have really reduced, occasions where I speak because I think Govind will probably agree and, maybe you and Shubha too, but, we've been saying the same thing for the last 4 decades.
Exactly.
And the problems are the same. We're talking about climate change. We started about talking about environment and then natural resource management, and it's the same. We were talking about environmental justice. Now we're talking about climate injustice. It's the same. We were talking about oppressive structural systems where women's voices are not heard, etc. It's the same. So whether the problem is climate change or whether the problem is the fact that women remain unseen and unheard, women who are out there actually, with the kind of knowledge and solutions that they can that should be mainstreamed, the problem is the same. So I think, and which is why I feel we've come ahead when we are looking at political participation. So I mean, there wasn't too much time, but maybe let me try and give you an example to illustrate and try and answer, what you've said, and then and as to how we can engage with BIMSTEC. I think we tell too few grounded stories to the world leaders. For instance, let me tell you, and today we have the social media to do that. If we can just bombard, reel after reel, Twitter, whatever, with photos, whatever, if we can just bombard them with real grounded stories, which many of us have, that's when things will change. And stories where women with some political power are able to change things, and that will, even goad countries where women are not there to adopt a lot of these things. And let me just give you an example for it. So, one of the training programs that I had done was with the Red Cross volunteers in Himachal and elected women leaders. Now, like I said, 50% of the reservation is for women. So, 55% usually at local panchayats are women leaders. So, uh, and I called the local Met Department officer, the local kind of DST, the science and technology people, etc., to be as resource persons, so they know what's happening in their state, because these women are never exposed to what's happening in these departments and states, right? So they were like the resource people. Now, after all this was over, when they understood, that what they are seeing in their villages is something that's going to stay with them, And when they understood that, they had programs which they could use to deal with it, what is it that these women decided? They went back to the, village, and one of the panchayat women said that there's a lot of fire, a lot of forest fire that's happening, right? Because there's no water in the forests and the heat is far more. So there's a lot of forest fire happening. We want water for that. There is a water harvesting scheme that the government has.
Aditi, we are running out of
Yeah.
time.
So
If
I'm
I
just
may
finishing.
just request you, because
So
Melanie
they
also
said,
has to make a.
So they said, can we put that water harvesting system in the forest so that we can collect the water, rejuvenate the forest, stop the fires, collect the water. So what I'm saying is that once they have this, they can add to their local knowledge. So I think it's extremely important to understand that whatever we say has been there for many years, but I think it's
Right.
very important for us to communicate to BIMSTEC through the means we have, through the written word, through podcasts, whatever, to tell them this is the ground reality and then to advocate with them on that, on whatever platforms we are at. We don't tell enough stories.
Thanks, Aditi. Melanie, if you want to make quick in.
Yes, sure. So I actually think one of the things that I see, especially in Sri Lanka, when it comes to our policy documents, we are amazing on paper. We do take into traditional knowledge into account. We do consider women's marginalization into account when we make policy, when we're writing policy. So usually it's there, but the problem is actually implementing it, and it never translates, like these policy documents or the words never translates into action. So that's one of the issues. And I think the other thing is and especially when we talk about working with grassroots and the localized solutions. I mean, we do have a lot of women who are doing agroecology in Sri Lanka, who are trying to transform previously degraded ecosystems through agroecology. So those solutions are there. We recently had the Neolini Forum in Kandy, the third Neolini forum, and a lot of solutions were discussed there. And we had state ministers, especially the Minister of Trade, taking part there. But then again, these never gets actionable, right? So there's also a lack of understanding, as I see, like Aditi and also like earlier, that we very clearly, we was talking about these knowledge systems and how localized knowledge doesn't get prioritized. But at the same time, I think we also see these different languages being spoken by different groups. Like said earlier, the environmental groups, and especially the civil society or the NGO groups, we tend to speak about climate change with the UN lingo. UN has given us a set of words, and if we only speak with the UN language, we're talking about climate change, right? Otherwise, we don't know what the topic is. That's the usual thing, right? But if we speak to local communities, they definitely understand what's happening in the environment, whether the fish catchments are low, whether the yields are low, if the rains are too much, they know, right? But what they don't know is about the national level decision making. They do not know about the regional level decisions. They don't know about global level decision making. Just like that, the people who know about national and global level discussions, they don't know what's happening on the ground. So there's this gap, right? So I think it's also important to think about how to bridge this gap. And when we engage with if we are to engage with BIMSTEC, and I think Sri Lanka, we have a prime minister who's a feminist, I hope still. So that, that's a little bit of a silver lining, though personally, myself and like a lot of others who we work with haven't had a lot of luck in terms of engaging with the government. But there are opportunities. And I think we have this history of feminist solidarity, especially in the South Asia. So I think it's probably time to revitalize this and, come into agreements, start having these regional dialogues between us and come into consensus, come into agreements, and then reach out to the decision makers, hopefully. We'll be able to push a little bit further, at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Should
Shubha,
we
I'm
move
going to
back?
hand it over to you, huh? Shubha, I know we are running a bit behind,
We're
but
running
over
a
to
bit
you.
behind, but yes, thank you all for this these inputs, and we will move now to the next session of the two other speakers. We would start with Govind Kelkar, who's an expert on gender and energy issues. She's also the executive director at GenDev. She has worked also on issues around women's land rights in South Asia. Govind, now over to you to look at the India context and also around energy, the energy center of BIMSTEC. Over to you, Govind.
Govind, you're not muted. Govind, unmute.
So I thank the organizers. And one question I wanted to raise, Aditi, what you pointed out, are we not tired of talking of gender? I think two things we are not tired of talking. One is the poverty and the other is gender, because these problems have not been solved. So long the problems are there, we should not get tired. Okay, coming back to the BIMSTEC. I think the BIMSTEC 7 states has been defined. Its area, the Aditi did a wonderful job. But energy is one of the core sector of their cooperation. That is important to know. Energy access and energy transition are central to the development of the region. These 7 states or BIMSTEC states. The region is endowed with energy resources, renewables, fossil fuels, hydropower, you name it, and they are all have the energies. But what is the per capita electricity consumption remains very low in many states. And they are uneven states, both in size and both in development and both in the ideology. They are exposed to indoor air pollution, that may be common. They have restrictions, use of energy in productive and reproductive work. They means here I'm talking of the women, why we are talking of gender question and not tired. Then women are also underrepresented in decision making, also in occupational roles. And whether BIMSTEC has done anything about it, they have not done it. I mean, at country level, in their own country, they have been doing something. Bangladesh has done something. India has done something. Nepal has done something. I'm not familiar with other states, but certain Thailand also has done something. But as a region, they have not moved. Then the lack of energy access, where there is abundance of energy sources or renewables and green energy in particular. The women's day-to-day lives are tightly bound by the energy-related burdens of cooking on biomass, collecting firewood, managing household tasks under energy constraints, facing health risk from household air pollution, and being very time poverty poor, time poverty, which is called time poor. So energy, they have the energy needs, but they lack access to energy. That is the important question when we talk of gender and energy, and how, or gender and climate change, how the household air pollution itself really creates a lot of kind of bad carbons. That is the important to recognize. Energy sector workforce, what are the women's? Very poor representation. Studies show that 3 to 15% they are workforce in the energy workforce. Energy utilities related to this workforce are related to energy utilities. Only 11% in rooftop solar panels, which I studied a bit, that while globally 32%. So look at this abundance of the kind of energy resources and where the women are. And women in the technical and engineering roles are even lower, 1% to 21%. So even when we have been talking about a lot of this kind of 30% representation, this 30% representation, where does it go? It needs very much in the energy sector. And I'm not for 30% representation. I'm in proportion of the population, 50% representation. But I said this was the minimum that the government thought would create a critical mass, but that also has not been done. However, there have been some kind of initiatives in policy, programming, action at international, national, and local levels. And they are more kind of country specific and not region wide. This is important to recognize. And that's why we can be very critical of the BIMSTEC, that BIMSTEC as a region has to take this question. Internationally, Sustainable Development Goal 7 says that ensure access to affordable and reliable and sustainable energy for all, for everybody. That is the for all is very, very important. Then overarching principle is of the SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals, leave no one behind. And leave no one behind does not mean only half of the population, it means everybody, vulnerable people, women and men, or everybody. Then there is the Vienna Energy Forum 2021, which reinforced these principles and said sustainable energy for inclusive development and productive capacities. So productive capacities of the have to be built. Of course, we are saying now in feminist economists that household care economy is very productive. Without this kind of production will not go any forward. I mean, it will really stumble and it will die out. So it is a very productive force. But nevertheless, the way it has been treated, the reproductive also, I would use here just to explain the situation. Energy compact, which is the more later kind of thing, latest thing. Energy compact for gender equality and women's empowerment is there. And which is very well would be represented in COP, that what I hear some of my students have gone there from Energia, to accelerate a just, inclusive and sustainable energy transition with two main goals. Energy Compact have two main goals. One is that women have an equal opportunity to lead, participate and benefit from a just, sustainable and inclusive energy transition. So energy transition mein what are their role, how they have played, it is very, very important that need to be seen. And women have, second principle is women have an equal access to control over sustainable energy products and services. Now, these are the energy compact, these are the things at present are being discussed and the question is being raised. As a result, some kind of country-specific examples have been introduced, and we have the Ujjwala scheme. We should not really downgrade it by any means. Ujjwala is where the first time India was very much appreciated for taking household energy for the first time into use kind of thing. How many people, women and children were dying because of the indoor air pollution, and they now call it household air pollution. So that was
Govind, to interrupt.
Yes, 1 minute, even
Sure.
if you give me, I'm
Yes,
concluding. Then there is a solar sector, which is very, very important. That solar sector also really is coming as a renewable, it's a green, it's a energy one has to see. But at the regional level, we don't hear about these things. We don't hear about this thing. And that is where our main kind of concern lies. So that one is strong and urgent action at the BIMSTEC, whether it is Dhaka office or at Bangalore office, they need to take it the kind of look at the region and source out or do something else, have their own staff to do some research and produce this data that what is happening in the region, where is the drawback and how to fill those gaps. So that would be important, and how to address these drawbacks. And only then it would be possible to have informed and solid policy making. Otherwise, haphazard policy would be made, they will be not implemented, like it is happening in Sri Lanka, India, everywhere. It is same story, Melani, here also. We are very progressive laws, but they are not implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Govind. Sorry for cutting you off. It
No,
was
no, you did not.
interesting, but we moved to the last speaker. We're happy to have Avipsha Rayamajhi with us, and she's with the UN Women. She's a research and capacity building consultant with the UN Women's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Over to you, Avipsha, for your presentation.
Thank you, Shubha. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see
Yes.
your screen. You can move it to full screen
full
because
screen.
now, yeah.
Yeah, is it full screen now?
Okay, I think we can go ahead.
Let me try it one more time.
Try.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Yes, okay. Thank you, first of all, to the organizers for convening this very timely discussion, as we also know that BIMSTEC has been emerging as an important regional bloc, and this conversation is very much necessary to also help regional feminist regional cooperation and embed gender and social inclusion across BIMSTEC's operational mandate as well. So in this presentation, I will just give a very quick overview of what UN Women has been doing in regards to driving gender responsive climate action in the region, also aligned with our triple mandate, and I will zoom into more on what our engagement has looked like with BIMSTEC, which is still in a very beginning. It's still very in a primitive, in a very beginning stage, but I can assure you that progress is being made, and I'm happy to share the status of how we are engaging with them in order to ensure that gender and social inclusion are embedded across their environment as well as climate change programs and policies. I think it would be very redundant for me to just reiterate the gendered vulnerabilities of climate change, so I'll just skip this, but just want to reiterate that I think our narrative in UN Women has always been not just to center the gendered vulnerabilities of climate change, but also to position and establish this narrative that women are also leaders in climate action and advance our actions accordingly. So in alignment to that, our climate strategy, gender responsive climate action is one of our three priority actions under women's economic empowerment. And under this, we work in the normative sector in order to support governments, regional organizations to advance gender responsive climate action, to advance global norms and standards. And then also with the grassroots organizations, women's rights organizations and CSOs to facilitate their engagement in the governance level as well. So our focus has always been to bridge this gap with policy between policymakers and grassroots organization. Our work across gender and climate is anchored in UN Women's triple mandate, which is the normative side, where we work with policymakers, regional organizations, more on the policy front by through technical expertise, through our convening power, as well as through evidence generation. Operational side, where we support programmatic work on implementation of the policies, and on coordination, where we facilitate coordination with other UN agencies to ensure coherence, as well as build partnerships and foster strong collaborations with diverse stakeholders, including CSOs, youth, indigenous groups, and so on. So at a regional level in the Asia and Pacific, where BIMSTEC is also housed, our work can be segregated as under programmatic leadership. We provide programmatic leadership. We have a regional climate program, which is implemented across 5 partner countries and across the region, Empower Women for Climate Resilient Societies program. I highlight this because most of our work under BIMSTEC has also been done as a part of this program. We provide normative leadership and technical support to national governments, regional and sub-regional organizations, including ASEAN and BIMSTEC, to integrate gender perspectives in climate policy, strategies, and intergovernmental negotiations, facilitate inclusive partnerships by engaging women's rights organizations and civil society organizations, and strengthen evidence base on gender, environment, and climate nexus through research, data, and by producing regional knowledge products to inform policy and programming. One of our flagship programs, as mentioned, is the Empower Women for Climate Resilient Societies programs, through which we work with national governments, regional bodies, with the women's rights organizations, and mainly with women entrepreneurs to help them get access to resources and platforms to benefit from renewable energy and to benefit from the just transition. Which brings me to the most important part of my presentation, that is how we've been engaging with BIMSTEC. So we started our engagement with BIMSTEC just last year in 2024 when UN Women convened the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Beijing Plus 30 review. We supported the participation of the Director of the Environment and Climate Division to be a part of this process. And I think it would be safe to say that this was also a good entry point for BIMSTEC to see the gender landscape and how negotiations and how intergovernmental processes take place. We also organized a side event in partnership with BIMSTEC, the government of Bangladesh. The Minister of Women's Affairs from Bangladesh was a keynote speaker in the event with ECMOD and UNDP on integrating gender and poverty in climate finance, where the representative from BIMSTEC shared about their plan of action on environment and climate change. And it was a good a platform for them to also engage with different stakeholders and enable this level of awareness on what BIMSTEC as a regional organization is and how they have been advancing environment and climate action through their efforts. So at a regional level, after that, we also enable the participation of BIMSTEC in a cross-regional learning workshop where national governments from 10 countries from the region participated, including government representatives from the Ministry of Finance, Environment, and Climate Change, including youth and CSOs. So this was also a good entry point for BIMSTEC to engage with these diverse stakeholders from BIMSTEC member states, as well as other countries from the region, in order to also know about how they've been operating in this space of gender and climate in the region. So this really garnered interest from BIMSTEC member states, as well as the Secretariat, to also organize a dedicated capacity building workshop for the governments of, for the member states, for the 7 member states. And we organized a capacity building workshop in Nepal in July for the technical government representatives from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Gender and Women's Affairs from the 7 BIMSTEC member states. The main objective of this workshop was first to orient these government representatives on the foundational concepts of gender and how it can be embedded within the climate landscape. But it was also a good platform to bring representatives from the 7 member states together and get their inputs and recommendations on how BIMSTEC can operationalize the plan of action on environment and climate change that they approved, I guess, in 2023. So from this workshop was instrumental because we did receive a lot of very important recommendations from the government representatives on how BIMSTEC can operationalize gender responsive climate action and the plan of action. And I think it's very interesting that a lot of the inputs that our speakers have already mentioned here in this session as well, starting from Dr. Aditi, who mentioned about the need to just really have a knowledge sharing platform and focus more on indigenous knowledge of women and different indigenous groups. I think this was also one of the key recommendations that government representatives from the 7 member states also provided to the Secretariat in order to take forward. So the key recommendations that the Secretariat received from these government representatives was building a strong knowledge base of different practices that are existing in countries, and convening frequent knowledge sharing platforms, webinars, etc., in order to have a strong evidence for all actions, for them to take actions forward. And the second was also focusing, the second recommendation that was provided to the Secretariat was also focusing more on the capacity building of these technical representatives, because the regional organization is also a sum of all of these member states, and a strong capacity, a strong understanding of gender and climate change, the nexus of gender and climate change amongst all of these technical representatives who work in the landscape is necessary. So that was also one of the key recommendations that BIMSTEC received from the government.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you move you to wind up, please?
Yes, for sure. So I think a lot of the things that these member states also recommended to BIMSTEC was already covered by our speakers as well. But one thing that I really wanted to focus on was when we engaged with BIMSTEC, we only engaged with a small section of the whole institution, that is the Environment and Climate Change Division, right? And there are 7 sectors of cooperation. Energy does not even fall under Environment and Climate Change Division. It falls under the security sector of cooperation. Disaster management falls under different sectors of cooperation. So all of these different areas are very much segregated even within the institution. So I think something to consider for BIMSTEC and for us as well, as we advocate for a strong regional bloc, is that the institutionalization of gender and social inclusion. So I think, just to also give a reference, ASEAN has ASEAN Committee on Women, which is already institutionalized, an overarching body. So through that, it advances gender action across different sectors. So for BIMSTEC as well, at an institutional level, to have an overarching framework, to have an overarching body that is dedicated to gender is very much necessary, so that we have a common body to engage with and take our agenda forward. Because as I already mentioned as well, there are several different sectors of cooperation, and it's very important that we have one key body that we can engage with and take this agenda forward. So I think that is one of the key learnings that we've also had while engaging with BIMSTEC. But with the body that we're engaging with, Environment and Climate Division, they have been progressing with ensuring and taking steps ahead to make their actions more gender responsive. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Preeti, over to you. I think we have some questions.
Thanks so much. I know there's so much going on in my head, but I'm going to ask our speakers some of the comments which I shared in the chat. I just want to read them out, and Govind and Avipsha, you can decide how you want to respond to it. So one from Josephine: still common people are unaware and kept in dark on the velocity of hazards due to climate change, and they are only pushed to the BRICS to reacting when they are affected. Hence, common people need to be created awareness by the state, or at least by us. I think many of the speakers talked about this. So this is Josephine's comment. Then Veena from Kanduri in India talked about, to bridge the gap, it's better to invite women from the field who can speak the real challenge. Absolutely true. It's the agency. I think even Farida talked about this. Pratishta raised women in STEM fields in renewable energy sector is even more less. Lack of sex disaggregated data makes it even more difficult to assess this issue. Vaishno from India has provided comments. I have worked on sustainable mobility and currently working on just transition issues in brick kiln industry. Building on what was said about triple injustice of exclusionary knowledge, patriarchal economy, and neo-colonial financial system, how can feminist BIMSTEC agenda ensure that transition to clean or green energy don't end up displacing unskilled informal workers, especially in male dominated sectors where they already have little voice and power? How do we make these transition truly just for both the environment and the workers? Thank you so much for your comments. I know time is less. Govind, if I may invite you first to respond, and then I'll give the floor to Avipsha.
I wanted to take up the whole question of knowledge. About when
Okay.
I was in UNIFEM, which later became UN Women, I did a study on Northeast India of indigenous women and how they changed, how they addressed the kind of adapted to the climate change. That they have strawberry field, for example, but because of the untimely rain, but changed to change to healthy fields, which could take it, and the different kind of cabbage variety they have introduced. So the knowledge, people, women have the knowledge, and it is unfortunate that we are not really kind of documenting that knowledge. So it is the question I am addressing it. It is not that they are in dark, that people don't know what climate change is doing. They are talking of untimely rain, they are talking of what pollution is doing to them, what they are doing. Only we don't have the adequate research and adequate advocacy at various levels, not with the government but also with the civil society, so that we are familiar with that, the people have the knowledge of this kind.
Thanks, Govind. Avipsha, did you want to respond to any of the comments? Or
What were the other questions, or the last
I
question?
will go back. I'll draw your attention. Let Avipsha make her intervention. Avipsha, did you want to say anything additional?
For me, I just wanted to add that when we're also working with national governments, as you know, all of the speakers have also mentioned on policy, they're very progressive. Sri Lanka, Nepal, right? So I think these are also like actually very strong entry points for BIMSTEC to take forward, because they already have the policies, so they can actually leverage that and move ahead, right? So it's just a matter of, number one, setting a strong regional task force that can bring everything together, and also, as reiterated by a lot of the speakers, also having a strong knowledge base, a strong knowledge sharing platform where the agenda can be sustained and advanced. That's it from my side. Over.
Thank you, Avipsha. I think part of it is I won't be, because BRICS Feminist Watch committed to do this webinar. Even though many of us were aware of BIMSTEC, I don't think we have, even as feminists, how we have learned about this platform, what are the who all are involved, as well as what monitoring what they are saying. So Avipsha, even in your meeting, I know you focus mainly on government representatives, but what has been the civil society engagement, or what has been the women's groups of feminist leaders engagement, which through UN Women Initiative, has that been at all possible, or has that been looked at?
From UN Women's side, we do engage with CSO's women rights organization, but in the interface of BIMSTEC, I think I would have to admit that because this is in a very beginning stage, our main focus right now has been to just get that political buy-in from the government representatives and seeing how this can be institutionalized. So the next step would definitely be setting up that platform for BIMSTEC to also engage more with women-led organizations, CSOs, and grassroots organizations. And I think that interest should also come from BIMSTEC. So as for now, our effort has been wholly on, first of all, having BIMSTEC understand the interlinkage between gender and climate, and support them in whatever ways we can for them to take this forward. So for now, to be honest, we've not explored this interlinkage, but we've only focused wholly on having BIMSTEC on board with the whole idea of embedding GESSI, gender and social inclusion, in their programs. Over.
So we look forward to in the future for such kind of thing. Just for winding up, before I hand over to Shubha, if any of the other speakers want to just take few seconds, you want to last thoughts or comments, Melani, Aditi, Govind, any last thoughts? I'll otherwise give it over to Shubha to wrap it up. Yeah, go ahead, Melanie. It's yours. Go ahead.
Really, just a quick thought, because looking at the UN Women presentation and the adaptation of the principles into BIMSTEC, and I've recently been aware of the UN Human Rights has a new program called UN Human Rights Economy. So basically, similar to what all of us have been talking about in terms of well-being economy or solidarity economy, basically principles for an economy that doesn't prioritize profit and puts people and planet ahead. So I'm just wondering whether, I know that UN organizations tend to work in separate silos sometimes, and you have UNDP working on like a whole different agenda than to the human rights agenda sometimes. But are there any, I just wanted to ask from Avipsha whether there's any possibility of collaboration, because this seems like, a larger framework on the economy itself. Just wanted to ask that from Avipsha. Thank you.
Okay. Avipsha, do you want to quickly respond and then we can close?
Yeah. Thank you, Melanie, for that question. But I think, it's true that, a lot of the things that happen that are very specific to the agencies, but our coordination, our mandate has always been, a triple mandate has always included coordination as well, and our effort will always be on synergizing our efforts. And moving forward as well, working with BIMSTEC, our focus will also be on that. That's it. Thank you so much.
I know we are running out of time. I really apologize. I know we just started to get into the issue. But Shubha, I'm going to give it to you for your final words or summation, anything you want to share.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think we really have, spanned a huge canvas, from looking at knowledge systems to how these issues get framed, who gets left out in the discourse, how what gets considered as important, to looking at how do we bring in indigenous knowledge, how do we hold bodies like BIMSTEC accountable for what they owe us. I mean, it's an issue of holding them accountable. How do we build that? People spoke about regional feminist solidarities, which we build our own capacities and knowledge in order to do that. Also create narratives that will help challenge the powers that there are. So we really have had a feast to talk about who pays the price for this kind of growth, who's raising those kind of questions. So we've had much food to think about, much food for thought, and thank you all for being here on a Monday night, or Monday evening, or Monday morning, depending on where you are. Preeti, over to you for the final thank yous to everybody.
I just wanted to quickly thanks so much, Shubha, for holding the space for us. And I really appreciate all the presenters and the depth of expertise and knowledge they brought in. I think we just started this. I know this conversation, as Aditi and Govind have been saying, we've been in feminist circle, we've been having eternally. But I think engaging with BIMSTEC, bringing that expertise, analysis, and our knowledge to BIMSTEC is something for us to think about how we do it. But thank you, and thanks for the audience for joining in and sharing your comments and thoughts. Have a wonderful evening. We will be coming out with a publication to capture what was shared, and then let's think what the next steps can be. But bye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Everyone, thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.